Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be scripting the pet follow system. Now, as always, if you guys do enjoy the video or it does help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified whenever I upload more Roblox development content. I also have a Patreon. If you guys like to support me and get access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this episode, there's a link down below in the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, let's hop right into it. So, hopping directly into the studio, the first thing that we're going to do is check out our pet models. Inside of Replicated storage, we should have a folder called Pets. Let's go ahead and drag that out into our workspace. Hit F while we have that selected, and that'll focus our camera on them. Now, we don't actually really need to visually see them. The most important thing here is that we want to look at our model object. Now, inside of our pets folder is a bunch of our pet models. One really important thing is that every single model should have a primary part set for them. So if we highlight every single one of our pet models, we can see that the primary part is set for each of them. If you're unfamiliar with what part you should actually set as the primary part, it should basically be your main primary square or your main portion of the pet. So for example, this part is named pet shape, and we can see that it's the large square most of the actual pet's body. If we look at all the other mesh parts inside of here, we can see that they're basically a bunch of other little smaller parts. And that's how we're able to figure out what mesh part we should actually set as the primary part of the model. Additionally, every single mesh part inside of our model should actually have a couple of different properties set for it. So for instance, it should not be able to collide. It probably can query and can touch, but I just set those to false as well, but it definitely should not be able to collide. Additionally, it should not be anchored neither, so make sure that all those mesh parts are not anchored. On top of that, pretty much every single part except for our primary part, which is this part right here, has a weld constraint inside of it. How this weld constraint is actually set up is part 0 is set to the primary part, so meshes/pet shape, while part 1 is set to these individual parts that the weld constraint is stored inside of. So for instance, the pet shape tail, that is part 1 right here. Then if we explore another mesh part, we can see there's another weld constraint. Once again, part 0 is set to the primary part, which is this part right here, and then part 1 is set to this part right here, the part that the weld constraint is inside of. Without those weld constraints, your pets would probably be all jumbled up and broken. Anyways, that's pretty much how every single model is actually set up inside of here. Now that we know that all of our pet models are set up correctly, let's go ahead and drag that folder directly inside of the replicated storage where it was previously. Now that we're inside of the replicated storage, we also want to go inside of the remotes folder, inside of the pets folder, and we actually want to add 2 new remote events. The first remote event is actually going to be called Replicate Equip Pet, and then we're going to duplicate that, and then we're going to rename this one to Replicate Unequip Pet. So inside of here, we already have the Equip Pet and the Unequip Pet, both are remote events. Basically, we're creating 2 more of these, but we're prefixing those with the word replicate. Now, additionally, inside of this folder, we want to add a remote function to this. This is going to be called Get Equipped Pets. Now, what are we going to be using these remotes for? The Get Equipped Pets remote function is actually going to be used for whenever the player joins a game. They're going to request from the server all of the equipped pets that every single player currently has in the server, and then the server is going to return all those pets back to the client. We're using this so that when we first join the game, we can load all of the other player pets and make sure that those pets are following those players. And then additionally, we have the Replicate Equip and Unequip Pet remotes. Basically, every single time a player equips a pet currently, we're firing the Equip or Unequip Pet remote event. And we're doing that to tell the individual players, hey, you've just equipped the pet. Now, on top of that, what we're also going to do is we're going to fire that remote event still, but we're also going to loop through all the players on the server, and then we're going to use the Replicate Equip or Unequip Pet remote events, and we're basically going to replicate each individual player's equipping or unequipping pets to all players in our game. If that sounds complicated, don't worry. It should be a lot more simpler once we actually get into it and you realize what we're doing. With that being said, we can go ahead and close those folders. And the first thing that we're actually going to get started with is going inside of the server script service and into the pets module script. Inside of here, we're going to go basically towards the bottom of the module script, right below the create pet function, and we're going to go ahead and create a new function inside of here. This is going to be called Get Equipped Pets, and that's actually going to have no arguments. Then inside of here, we actually want to create a variable called all equipped pets, and that's going to be equal to a table. Now, what we actually want to do is loop through all the players in our game. But for us to do that, we of course need to add the player service to our script. So now that we've got the player service, we're going to go back down to that function, and now we can say in players, get players do. Then for each individual player, we actually want to add them to this table. So we're going to say player.userid equals a blank table. Then we want to create a variable for their profile, and that's going to of course be equal to player data.profiles and index that with the player. If we're not able to find their profile, then we want to continue end. So basically tell the loop to go to the next player, and then we're going to create a variable called equipped pets, that's going to be equal to the pets config.getEquippedPets and pass through the profile.data. Then we actually want to loop through all the pets that the player has equipped. And for each individual pet, we want to add those to the all equipped pets table. So of course, we're going to index that with the player.userID. Then we want to index that table with pet.uuid, and we want to set that equal to the pet instance, just like that. And then finally, after the for loop finishes, we want to go ahead and return that all equipped pets variable, just like that. You're probably thinking, when are we actually going to use this function? Well, we're going to use this function anytime that remote function that we just created is called. So inside the remotes folder, we have the getEquippedPets remote function. We're going to say onServerRevoke, and we're going to set the callback to the pets.getEquippedPets function, just like that. Then we also need to update some of our functions above as well. So for instance, we want to go to the delete pet function, and inside of here, we actually check if the pet is locked. Another thing that we want to check is if the pet is actually equipped, because if the pet is equipped, then we want to tell all the players in the game, hey, this player is deleting their pet, so they're unequipping it. So what we want to do is we actually want to call the unequippedPet function, and we're going to pass through the player and the UUID, just like that. We then want to go to the equipPet function, and below where we fire the equipPet remote event, we want to loop through all of the players in our game. Then we want to check if the player which is calling this function, or the player argument of this function, if that player is equal to the loop player, then we want to continue looping through this list. Otherwise, we want to fire the replicate equipPet remote event. Now, the client that we want to fire this remote event to is the loop player, and we want to pass through the player argument of this function. And then finally, we want to pass through the pet instance that player is equipping as well, just like that. So once again, when we call the equipPet function, what we're doing is once we run through this entire function, we then tell the client, so whoever actually called this function, hey, we did just equip this pet, here's the UUID. Then what we're doing is we're also telling every other player in the game as well by using the replicate equipPet remote event. The reason that we need to loop through every single player is because we want to fire this remote event to every single player except for the player who actually called this function, because we're already firing a remote event to that player. Now, you could fire this remote event to the client as well. It wouldn't really hurt, but it is wasting a little bit of our networking resources, so that's why we're avoiding doing that. Now that we've set this up for the equipPet function, we also need to set this up for the unequipPet function as well. So let's go ahead and copy this for loop and then go to the unequipPet function right here. We'll go ahead and paste that for loop right there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually fire the replicate unequip remote event. And then instead of passing a pet instance, we're actually going to pass through the UUID, just like that. Now, with that being said, we're pretty much good on the server side. So let's actually go ahead and move over to the client side. Going inside of the starter player, inside of the starter player scripts, we're going to add a brand new local script to this, and we're going to rename this local script to pet follow. Inside of the script, let's go ahead and get some of our common variables like the player service, and then we're also going to need the replicate storage as well. Let's create a variable for the remotes folder. That's going to be equal to replicate storage.remotes.pets. Now that we have the remotes folder, let's go ahead and connect a bunch of our remote events. So equip pet on client event connect. We're not going to connect that to anything yet. We'll also do unequip pet. Then we have replicate equip pet and replicate unequip pet. And those are all the remote events that we're going to be using for right now. We'll create a few more variables up here. So we're going to go ahead and create the player variable. That's of course going to be equal to players.localPlayer. Then let's go ahead and get the pets config. That's of course equal to require replicate storage.configs.pets. And let's also get the state manager as well. That's going to be equal to replicate storage.client.state. Then we'll go ahead and create a variable called equipped pets. That's going to be equal to a blank table. Now, what this table is actually going to be, we're going to go ahead and type assert this so that we can understand what this table actually is. So this is going to be a table. Now, this table is actually going to be a dictionary. So the keys of our dictionary are actually going to be player user IDs, which are numbers. And now the value for each key is actually going to be another table, and more specifically, another dictionary. Now, the keys for this dictionary are actually going to be pet UUIDs. So those are going to be strings, and the value of those keys are going to be pet instances. So we're going to say petsconfig.petInstance. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you. Just to go over this once again. The equip pets table is going to be a table. Now inside of this table, there are going to be player user IDs as the keys, and then as the value, it's going to be another table, more specifically a dictionary. And this dictionary is going to have all of the players' pets inside of it. The key is going to be the pet's UUID, and now the value is going to be the pet instance. And of course, the reason that we're creating this variable is so that we can track every single player's pet's data in the game so that we're able to display their pets. Then we're going to create another variable below this. This one is actually going to be called pet positions, and that's going to be equal to a table. Now inside of this table, we're going to create another table, and this table is actually going to have two properties. The first property is going to be called position, and that's going to be equal to a vector 3. It's also going to have another property, and this property is going to be called orientation, and this is also going to be a vector 3 as well. Now for the position, the first one we actually are going to say 0, 1, 10, and for the orientation, we're actually going to say 0, -90, 0, just like that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a second table. So we're going to go ahead, copy and paste that. For the second table, the position is going to be -7.5. We're going to keep 1 for the Y and then 8 for the Z. And for the orientation, instead of being -90, it's actually going to be -120. We're going to duplicate this one more time. For the position, instead of it being -7.5, it's going to be +7.5. And for the orientation, instead of being -120, it's going to be -60. Now, like I said, this variable doesn't really make much sense. We're actually going to be using this to position the pets around the player, but when we actually get around to scripting that, I'll go more in depth about what this table is, why it's set up like it is, and everything else like that. Anyways, the next thing that we're going to do is actually create a new function. This function is going to be called pet follow. It's going to accept a player and a pet, which is actually going to be a pet instance. The first thing we want to do inside of this function is we want to create a variable for the player's character. Now that's going to be equal to player.character, or if that isn't set, then we want to actually say player.character added, and then we want to wait for that. Now you guys are probably thinking, isn't this really weird? Why are we using the wait function right here? But the wait method will actually stall the pet follow function from continuing running, and then once this function actually stops and the character is returned, this variable will be set to that, and then the function will continue to run. So this is basically the best way to set a character variable. Anyways, after that, we want to check if there is still not a character, and if there isn't one, then we want to return n to stop the function right there. After this, we want to create a variable for the humanoid root part. That's going to be equal to the character find first child humanoid root part, and make sure that you're spelling that correctly, and we're going to assert this to actually be the type of a part. And of course, we're going to say if not humanoid root part, then return n, stop the function right there. Also, instead of using find first child, we actually want to say wait for child, because sometimes the player's character might not be fully loaded in, so the humanoid root part might not be there yet. After that, we want to create a variable called pets. That's going to be equal to the equipped pets, and then we want to index this with the player.userID. Now, one thing about this that's actually a little bit weird, with the equipped pets table, we're actually going to have to change this number. Now, when we were creating this, like I said, the player's user ID is actually a number. The thing is, though, is that on the server side right here, when we're using the get equipped pets function, this is going to return a table. And how this table is set up is by using the player's user ID as well. And like I said, the way that this function is going to work is by the client calling the get equipped pets remote function. So this table is going to be returned to the client when that remote function is called, and we're going to call that remote function inside of this script right here. That's how we're going to actually set this equipped pets variable. The thing is, though, is that Roblox is a little weird when it comes to replicating stuff from the server to the client. In this instance, the one thing that's actually weird is that Roblox actually changes the player's user ID, all of these player user IDs right here, which were previously numbers, and when they replicate it back to the client, they actually turn these numbers into strings. So the type that we asserted right here is actually incorrect. We want to say string instead of number, and now every single time that we index this table, instead of just saying player.userID, we actually have to call toString and then pass the player's user ID into that function so that we can properly index this table with the specific player. Now, I feel like I talked for a long time right there, and hopefully that isn't too confusing for you guys. TLDR, when sending tables through remote events or remote functions, Roblox converts keys that are stored as numbers to strings on the client side. So that's why we have to say toString and then pass through the player.userID to actually index that table. Anyways, with that being said, we can then say if not pets, then return n, so stop the function right there. Otherwise, what we're then going to do is we're actually going to say pets, we're going to index pet.uuid, and then we're going to set that equal to the pet instance. So basically, we're going to add the pets to the table in case it's not already inside of here. Then we want to create a variable called pets folder. That's going to be equal to character find first child pets, and if we're not able to find that folder, then what we actually want to do is we want to say pets folder equals instance.new. We're going to create a brand new folder, and we're going to parent that to the player's character. Then we want to set the name of the pets folder. So the name is actually going to be called pets, and now we've created that pets folder. So now that the pets folder variable is definitely set to a folder, what we're then going to do is create a variable called pet model, and that's of course going to be equal replicate storage dot pets find first child pet dot model, and we're going to want to clone that as well. Then what we want to do is we want to say pet model. Let's assert the type of this as well to be a model. Then we're going to say pet model, and we're going to say pivot to, and we're going to move that model to the humanoid root part.cframe. So we're basically going to move the pet model over to the player. Then we're going to create a variable called char attachment, and that's going to be equal to instance.new. We want to create a brand new attachment, and we want to parent that to the humanoid root part. Then we actually want to modify the visibility of this, and we want to set that to false. Now we're going to create another attachment as well, so let's actually go ahead and copy and paste this. The second attachment is actually going to be called pet attachment, and we're going to parent that to the pet model.primary part. And then we want to make sure that we set the visibility of that to false. false as well, just like that. Next, what we want to do is we want to actually create a variable called align position. That's of course going to be equal to a brand new align position instance, and we're going to parent this to the pet model. Now we want to set the properties of this align position. So the max torque is going to be equal to 25,000. The attachment 0 is going to be equal to the pet attachment. The attachment 1 is going to be equal to the character attachment, and then we want to set the responsiveness to 25. And now we have our align position created. We're then going to go ahead and copy this. Instead of align position, we actually want to set this to align orientation, and then we want to create that object as well. So align orientation. Now the properties of this, we actually want to set the max torque, and the max torque is going to also be equal to 25,000. The responsiveness is also going to be 25, and we're going to set the attachments the same way as well. So 0 is the pet attachment, while 1 is the character attachment. Then we're going to go ahead and create a variable called order. This is going to be equal to a brand new int value, and this will be parented to the pet model. We want to then set the name of this to order, and we want to set the value of this to 0 for right now. Now, to determine how the pet is going to be positioned, like I said, we're going to be using this table right here. Now, inside of this table, we have 3 tables. Basically, you could think of each of these tables as a position or a setup for each of the individual pets. So for instance, the first pet that we equip relative to the player, the pet's position is going to be 1 on the y-axis, and then it's going to be 10 on the z-axis. So basically, this first pet is going to appear directly behind the player. Now, for the second and the third pet, these are going to appear beside the first pet. So on the left and the right, behind the player. So the first pet that gets equipped is going to be positioned like this. The second pet that gets equipped is going to be positioned like this. And the third pet that we equip is going to be positioned like this. Now in a little bit, I'll show you how you can easily modify these pet positions and add more in case you want to be able to equip 5 or maybe even 10 pets. Anyways, we're going to come back down to here, and below where we create the order, we want to create a variable called pet position, and this is going to be equal to pet positions, and we want to index this table with the order.value. So we're basically indexing that table with what place the pet is meant to be positioned in. Then we want to set the position of the character attachment to the pet position dot position, and then we also want to set the orientation of the character attachment to the orientation of the pet position table, just like that. Once we've done all of that, there's 2 more things that we want to do, and the first thing we want to do is rename the model of the pet, and we want to actually set that to the UUID of the pet so that we can easily find that in the future. And then we also want to parent the pet model to the pets folder, just like that. Now if we look inside of our pet follow function, right here we actually set the order to 0. Instead of doing that, we actually want to create a function above our pet follow function. This one is going to be called get pet order, and it's going to accept a character, which of course is a model. Inside of here, what we want to do is we want to say pet folder. That's going to be equal to character, find first child, pets. If we're not able to find the pet folder, then we're just going to return 1 and stop the function right there. What we then want to do is inside of the pet folder, we actually want to check how many children are inside of here. So we're going to say hashtag and get children. And now if there are 0 children inside of here, we want to return 1. So basically, if there are no pets equipped, then we're going to put that pet in the first slot. We're then going to create a variable called active slots, and that's going to be equal to a table. Then we want to loop through all the pets inside of the player's pet folder. So pet folder, get children, do. Then we're going to create a variable for the order, and the order is going to be that int value inside of the pet folder. So we're going to say pet.order.value, and then we're going to index active slots with the specific order, and we're going to set that to order, just like that. Then after that for loop, what we also want to do is we then want to loop through all the available slots. So we're going to say for available slot equals 1. The next number is going to be how many total slots we want there to be. So if the max amount of pets a player can equip is 5, we're going to say 5. If the max is 3, we're going to say 3. I'm just going to say 5 for right now, and then we want to increase the number by 1 every single time. Then what we want to do is we want to check through the active slots, and we want to index that with the available slot. And if that number is not inside of active slots, then we actually want to return active slot, just like that. So basically what we're going to do is if there are no pets currently equipped, we're going to say the first slot should be 1. But if the player does have some pets equipped, then we're going to go through all of the pets in the pet folder, and we're going to get the order of every single individual pet. So basically certain pets could be 1, another pet could be 2, another pet could be 4, and we're going to put all those numbers inside of this table. Then if we know the player can equip up to 5 pets, we're going to go through all of those numbers. So we're going to check 1, is that already taken? We're going to then check 2, is that already taken? Then we'll check 3. Okay, 3 is not taken, so then that pet is going to end up in slot 3. Now that we have that function created, let's go ahead and go back inside of the pet follow function, come down to where we've set the value of the order, and this time we're actually going to call the get pet order function, and we're going to pass through the player's character, just like that. Let's go ahead and actually use this function. Let's go ahead and connect the equip pet remote event. So we're going to say function, and the only argument we're going to get in this remote event is going to be the UUID of the specific pet that we have equipped. So let's go ahead and create a variable called pet instance. That's going to be equal to state manager.getData.pet pets, and then we want to index that with the pet UUID. Then we're going to create a variable called pets. That's going to be equal to equipped pets. We're going to index that table with toString, and then we're going to use player.userID. And then we basically want to add the brand new pets UUID to our pets table. So we're going to set that to the pet instance. And then finally, we want to call the pet follow function and pass through the player and the pet instance just like that. Now, before we're able to actually test this out real quick, we have to do two quick things. So towards the bottom of our script, let's actually go ahead and say statesmanager.getData. Now, the reason that we're just randomly calling this function and we're not actually setting this to anything is because we basically just want to pause the script until our data is actually loaded. Once it's loaded, we then want to say equipped pets. We're going to set that equal to remote.getEquippedPets, and we want to call invoke server on this. So we're going to call that remote function. Then we're going to loop through all the players in our game. So players get players. And what we're going to do is we're going to listen for the character added event, and we want to connect this to an anonymous function. And then we haven't created the function that we actually want to call inside of here yet, but on top of that, we also want to listen to whenever a player is added to our game. We're going to connect that to an anonymous function as well. And once again, we want to listen to that whenever that character added event is called as well, and we want to connect that to an anonymous function. Okay, so there we go. We've now laid all of that out. What we then want to do is create a brand new function. This function is going to be called Initialize Player, and that's going to accept a player. Now inside of this function, all we're going to do is we're going to say local pets equals equipped pets, index that with toString player.userID. If we don't find that, then we would just want to return end. If we are able to find those player pets, then we actually want to loop through all those pets. So we're going to say for UUID pet in pets do, and then we want to call the pet follow function with passing through the player and passing through the pet instance just like that. Now that we've created that function, let's go back down to where we actually loop through all the players and stuff like that. And when the player's character is added, we want to call the initialize player, pass through the player. We also want to do this for every single player that's currently in the game as well, so we're going to add that right there. And then for all the future players that join, we also want to call this when their character is added as well. So now we can go ahead, save the game, and start this up and test it out. So once we get in here, we can say give pet, and we're going to give ourselves a cat. Let's go ahead, go to pets, click on equip, and now we can actually see that our cat pet is following directly behind us, and it is actually following us, and it's looking all good. We can also give ourselves like maybe 2 or 3 more cat pets, and we can go ahead and equip all of those. Quick mistake that we made right up here at the get pet order function. When we're actually looping through the available slots, we're accidentally returning active slots, which is a table, and we actually want to return the available slot, which is a number. So we have to make sure that we return that, and now we should be good. Now, if we give ourselves like 3 cat pets and equip all of them, we can actually see that they are positioned apart from each other. Additionally, if we go inside of the workspace, inside of our character, and we scroll down to the humanoid root part and scroll down inside of here, we have 3 attachments inside of here. Now, additionally, if we look at our pet follow script and look at the pet positions table, we can compare these, and we can see that the position property of this is set to the exact same position as this, as well as the orientation. So we can see that this one is set to the first position, this is set to the third position, and this one is set to the second position right here. So let's say that you were wanting to play around and modify these positions. It's actually really easy. Just select the attachment that you want to mess around with, hit Control-2 to actually bring this little toggle up so that we can move it around, and then just drag it around a little bit. You can go ahead and play around with this, so move it over to here. Then we can hit Control and 4, and now we can actually play with the orientation a little bit as well. So if we want it to look a little bit differently, or if we wanted it to look a little bit side from side, that's how we could easily position this. So now what we would do is we would take this position, let's go back to our pets follow script, and let's just say that we want to add a 4th position to this. So let's go ahead and say position. We're going to set that equal to a new vector 3. And for this one, we're going to say negative 3.078, 1, and 3.287. And then we also have the orientation as well. So let's go ahead and create another vector 3. And then we can literally just copy and paste this orientation. So boom, there you go. Now you've got your position and your orientation. And now we could equip up to 4 pets and have them positioned correctly around us as well. Now I'm not going to actually keep that in here. I'm just saying that's how you could easily mess around with these positions and create, say, 5 positions. So if you want to have 5 pets equipped, then you could easily play around with this right here and then add those new ones directly to this positions table as well. So now that we've learned how we could easily reposition pets, let's go ahead and create a new function below our pet follow function, and we're actually going to call this pet stop follow. This function is going to accept a player and a UUID, which is going to be a string. The first thing we want to do is get the player's pets. So we're going to say pets equals equipped pets, index that with toString player.userID. If not pets, then return n. Otherwise, we're going to say pets, index that with the specific UUID and set that equal to nil. We then want to create a variable for the player's character. That's of course going to be equal to player.character. And if there is no character, then we just want to return n because the player's pets already are not following them and the player might have just died or something odd like that might have happened. Let's go ahead and create a variable called pets folder. That's of course going to be equal to character, find first child. Pets, if not pets folder, then return end, create a variable for the model that's going to be equal to pets folder, find first child, UUID. And if we do find that model, then what do we want to do? Well, we just want to destroy that model just like that. And now we're done with that function. So we're effectively removing the player's pet from their actual table, and then we're also going to destroy the model if it's currently following the player around. The only reason that it wouldn't be following the player around is if maybe the player literally just died. Now, when do we want to actually call this function? Well, we can actually hook this function directly up to the replicate unequip pet function. So we're going to say pet stop follow just like that. And then we can also hook up the pet follow function directly to the replicate equip pet remote event. Now, additionally, for the unequip pet remote event, we're going to go ahead and create an anonymous function. The only argument is going to be the UID, which is passed through this remote event. And then we want to call the pet stop follow function. And we want to pass through the player and the UUID just like that. Okay, I'd like to test this out with multiple players. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the server script service, inside of the Cmdr, inside of the hooks folder, open this up, and then we basically want to just comment all of that out so that we're not stopped by Cmdr and we can actually use commands. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go to test. We're going to make sure that we have this on local server, 2 players, and then we're going to go ahead and click start. Now we are in the game on 2 different clients. Let's go ahead and give ourselves a few pets. Okay, so this character is now 3 pets. Let's go ahead and equip all 3 of them. And we can see that on my screen, I have all the pets equipped, and on the other client screen, I have all those pets equipped as well. Let's go ahead and actually unequip one of the pets. So unequip, we can see that the pet has been unequipped. Let's go ahead and equip it and now delete it. And we can see that the pet has been deleted. We can also see that an error pops up here. This is actually unrelated to this, and it's actually related to the pet's inventory, but this error can be ignored. It's actually perfectly fine as well. Let's go ahead and unequip all, re-equip all of them. We can do that a couple of times and see that that's all working perfectly. Let's go ahead and go over to our other client, give ourselves pets on this character as well. So there we go. Just gave myself 3 cat pets, equip best. We can see that it is replicated to both clients perfectly. And then let's just unequip all, equip best, and we can see that this is all working perfectly. Another thing that we should definitely test is resetting our character. So let's go ahead and kill this character and respawn it. We can see that when this character is respawned, all the pets are respawned along with that character on both clients. So that means that this seems to be working perfectly on all sides. Now, some of you guys might actually want to add a little bit of an animation to your pet to kind of make them move a little bit and make them look a little bit less boring. So let's actually go ahead and do that. We're actually going to go back to the pet follow function, and we're going to go basically to the bottom of it. So right after we parent the pet model to the pets folder, what we're going to do is we're going to create another variable. This is going to be called tweeninfo, and it's just going to be equal to tweeninfo.nil, and we're just going to put 1 inside of here. So basically this tween is going to take 1 second. Then we're going to create a variable called uptween, and then we have to require the tween service at the top of the script. So we're going to say tween service, there we go. And now we're going to set the uptween variable equal to tween service :create. We'll then pass through the character attachment, the tween info variable, and then we're going to create a table inside of here. Now inside of here, we actually want to adjust the position property of the character attachment. So we're going to create a brand new vector3, and all we actually want to do is modify the Y position of the pet. So we basically want to increase the pet's Y position by like 0.5, and then we also want to decrease it by 0.5 as well. That'll kind of give it the moving up and down animation. So how we're going to do this with the position is we're going to create a new vector, and we don't want to adjust the X or the Z. So for the X and the Z, we're going to say character.position.x, and then we'll also do the same thing for the Z axis as well. Now for Y, we actually want to say 1.5. Now we may want to also update the orientation as well, and we're going to basically make the pet look up and down a tiny bit just to give it that slight more detail and slight bit more of animation. So with the orientation, we actually want to adjust the Z orientation. So we're going to go ahead and say X and Y, and then for Z, we're going to say -5, and that's just going to give it a slight tilt. Then what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste this, and now we're going to say down tween. We still want to basically adjust all the same stuff, but all we want to do is change the number up here a little bit. So now we want to make the pet model go down, so we're going to say 0, and then we also want to change where the pet's looking a tiny bit as well. So now we're going to say +5 instead of -5. Now that we've created both of those, we then want to say uptween.completed. So when this tween actually finishes, and what we want to do is we're going to create an anonymous function, and then we're going to call the play method on the down tween. And then we're going to copy and paste this. And now when the down tween is finished, we actually want to play the up tween. So basically when each of these finish, they're going to continuously call each other. So when each tween finishes, it'll call each other, and that'll put this into an animation loop basically. And then finally, we're going to say up tween, play, and play that tween. So we can go ahead and go into our game. If we equip all of these cat pets and then we look at them, we can actually now see that they do have a little bit of an animation. Now it's pretty hard to see that their faces are actually actually moving up and down a tiny bit as well, but their orientation is actually changing with this as well. And I think that looks pretty good, and it's also at least enough of a starter to get you guys started, and you can modify this to make it look however you want to. Next, what we're going to do is create a GUI, because in Clicking Simulator, pets actually have a little overhead GUI, which shows its rarity and the pet's name as well. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the pets, and we're just going to take this bunny pet right here and put it inside of the workspace. Now, inside of the bunny pet, we want to go inside of the primary part, which is this part right here, and we want to add a billboard GUI to this. We'll then rename this billboard GUI to Pet GUI. Now, the most important property to set on this is reset on spawn. We want to make sure that we set that to false, and then we'll play around with some more of these properties in a little bit. We're going to go ahead and throw a frame inside of here. For the size of this frame, we of course want to set that to scale, so let's go ahead and set that to 1, 0, 1, 0. And now we can actually see basically how big this GUI is, so we can play around with this GUI size right here. Let's go ahead and set that to 1, 0, 1, 0 as well. And then let's also adjust its stud offset and set to Y to 4 so that this GUI appears above the actual pet. Now, for the size of this, I'm going to go with 3 on the X and 5 for the Y. So it expands a little bit further than the pet, and it is definitely taller than the pet as well. Of course, with this, you can decide if you want always on top to be on true, or if you don't want that to be. You can also set the light influence to 0 or set it to 1. And then you're also going to want to modify the max distance as well. I usually set this to about 25, but maybe you want to increase this to something like 30 or maybe even 50. Then inside of this frame, we actually want to throw a UI list layout into this, and then we also want to throw a text label as well. We're going to rename this text label to Rarity. For the font, of course, we want to go with a Gotham. You may even want to go with a bold. For the background transparency, we want to set that to 1. For the size, on the X scale, we're going to set that to 1, and on the Y, we're going to set that to 0.15. Now we can actually see our text. Let's just go ahead and set this text temporarily to common. For the text color, we actually want this to be a white, and we also want it to be scaled, and then we also want to modify the stroke transparency of this as well. I'm going to set my stroke transparency to 0.75. It might look a little bit bad here because it's white on white, but eventually, or even now, we could just set the background transparency of this frame to 1 or 0.9 just so that we can still see how far it extends. Then with the UI list layout, we can actually set the vertical alignment to bottom so it appears towards the bottom of that frame. We can also duplicate this text label, and instead of saying Rarity, we can say Pet Name. For the text of this, let's just go ahead and say something like Bunny. We also might want to adjust the size of this text label to make it just slightly smaller than the Rarity text label, so I'm going to say 0.125 instead of 0.15, and now it's slightly smaller. And now I think that looks pretty good. Like I said, you might want to put always on top to true, or you could even adjust the studs offset as well to maybe 4.5, and then you could always have always on top on false. Then let's go ahead and set the background transparency of this frame to 1 so that we no longer see it, and then I'm also going to modify the light influence, set that to 0 so that it always appears bright white, and now I think that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this GUI, and I'm actually going to put this inside of the replicated storage, and I'm going to put the bunny pet back inside of the replicated storage inside of the pets folder as well. Then what we can do is go back into our pet follow local script. Right after where we do all this tweening, we can actually start adding the GUI. Now, you could of course separate this stuff into your own functions. I just figured it could all fit inside of this one function. It doesn't need its own functions, but if you guys definitely want to, this function is getting pretty bulky. I would probably do that as well. Anyways, let's go towards the top of our script. Now, below our remotes variable, we're going to create a new variable called GUI template, and that's going to be equal to replicated storage.pet GUI, just like that. Then going back down to the function, right below where we actually play the tween, we're going to say local GUI equals GUI template, and we're going to clone that. And then we want to actually parent that to the pet model.primary part. Then let's go ahead and update those text labels. So for the pet name, we want to set the text of this to the pet.name. And then for the rarity, we of course just want to set that to the pet.rarity. Okay, so now those GUIs are all set up. Let's go ahead, go into our game and test this out. So we can now see that we do have a common cat right there, and the GUI is looking great. Now there's actually one more thing though. Players are able to rename their pets. So we want to make sure that we actually update the GUI with the new pet's name every time a pet gets renamed. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and separate these two remote functions that we kind of had grouped together right here. And then we're going to say remotes.renamepet.onClientEvent, and we want to connect that to an anonymous function. This anonymous function is going to give us the UUID, which is going to be a string, and a new name, which is going to be a string as well. Inside of here, we want to get the pets variable. That's good, of course, going to be equal to equipped pets, and then we want to index that with the toString player.userID. We then want to create a variable for the player's character. That's going to be equal to player.character. And if we don't find the player's character, then we just want to return end and stop the function right there. Otherwise, if we do find that, then we want to get the player's pet folder, which is inside of the characters. So find first child, pets. And if we're not able to find that pet folder, then we just want to stop the function right there. Let's then go ahead and get the actual pet model. And that's going to be equal to pet folder, find first child, and look for that UUID. And if we do find that, that's of course going to be a model. So let's assert that type. And if we don't find that, then we'll stop the function right there. Then let's create a variable called GUI, and that's going to be equal to pet model, find first child of of class, and we want to look for a billboard GUI. Now, if we are able to find that GUI, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to go inside of the GUI, inside of the frame. There is a text label called pet name, and we want to set the text equal to the name argument that we got passed to us just like that. Oh, and real quick, this GUI is actually stored inside of the primary part of the pet model, not just the pet model, so make sure that we look for it right there, and then we can go ahead and test this out. So we've got our cat equipped. Let's go ahead and rename it to just a bunch of random letters, and we can see that that is replicated right there, and that's working perfectly. Now, one thing to think about that we have not added in is when other players actually rename their pet, replicating that to other players. Now, we're not actually going to include that in this episode, but from understanding how we're replicating, equipping, and unequipping pets to all the other players in our game, you should be able to take that knowledge and then be able to do the same thing for renaming pets and replicate that data to all players as well. So go ahead and try to implement that on your own if you feel like it. Now, we actually have one more thing that we need to do. Something that we have not accounted for yet is when a player joins the game after we've been inside of the game already. So imagine if we're playing the game, we're in there, we're doing our thing, and then another player joins. As soon as they join, we actually have no way of knowing what pets they currently have equipped. Just as an example, if we go to our pet follow local script on the client side, we can actually see this is kind of the only thing that we do whenever a new player joins the game. We basically listen for their character added event, and then we call the initialize player on that character. Now, honestly, calling this function even when the player is added, I don't think that does any harm, so we're going to do that as well. But with that being said, the initialize player function doesn't actually do anything to get the new player's data. So there's two solutions that I've thought about. One is on our own client side. Whenever a player joins our game, and let's just say we call this initialize player function, we could use a remote function to communicate with the server and say, hey, what pets does this player actually have equipped? And then the server will return us that information. The issue with this, though, is that when a player first joins the game, if we're automatically firing that remote function right away, the player's profile on the server might not actually be loaded yet. And we actually did this originally in the series, and that gave us some issues as well. So considering the player's profile might not be loaded as soon as they join the game, if we call the remote function would just say, hey, the player has no pets equipped, and that data would be incorrect. So instead of doing that, what we're actually going to do is we're going to go inside of the server script service, inside of the player data folder, and we're going to open up the manager script. Now inside of here, right below where we have our profiles variable, we're going to create another variable, and this one is going to be called profile loaded, and this is actually going to be equal to an instance.new. And now the brand new instance that we're going to be creating is a bindable event. Now, if you guys are unfamiliar with what bindable events are, they're very similar to remote events, but basically bindable events allow you to basically create a connection between two different scripts. So you can literally think about this as a remote event, but rather than going from the client to the server or the server to the client, it just goes from the server to the server. So basically from script to script. And you can also use this on the client as well. So if you created a bindable event on the client, although right here we created this on the server, you could then communicate from client to your own client, which would just be scripts communicating back and forth with each other. Anyways, now that we've created this bindable event inside of this manager, any script which actually requires the player data manager can now listen to this bindable event being fired. So whenever the player's profile is loaded, we also have the script firing this event as well. So let's go inside of our data script right here. And now inside of here, if we scroll down to the load profile function, we can actually see right where we add the player's profile to the profiles variable. And then also when we create the player's leader stats, that's how we know that the player's profile is actually loaded. So below the create leader stats, what we're actually going to do is we're going to say manager.profile loaded fire, and then we're going to pass through the player and the profile.data. So like I said, you can think of this similar to a remote event. We're going to go ahead and fire this information off, and all other scripts which utilize this event will be able to connect with this event and then get this information whenever this event is fired. So now to actually connect to that event, we're going to go inside of the pet server script, and inside of here, we're going to go all the way down to the bottom. And now on the very last line, we're going to say player data.profile loaded.event, and then we're going to connect this to an anonymous function. Now the arguments of this anonymous function are of course going to be a player and their data, but we're not going to type assert the data. What we're then going to do is we're going to create a variable called equipped pets, and that's going to be equal to petsconfig.getEquippedPets, and we're going to pass through the player's profile data. Then we're going to loop through all those pets. So for UUID, pet in equipped pets do. And now what we actually want to do is effectively the exact same thing that we do to replicate the equip pet event to all players in our game. So let's actually go to the equip pet function, and we can see right here, after we fire the equip pet remote event for the one client, we're then going to go ahead and replicate this. We're doing the process right here of replicating it to all the other clients. So let's actually go ahead and copy that code right there. Then we're going to go back down here, and inside of this for loop, we're going to paste that for loop as well. So now what we're doing, when a player joins the game and their profile is loaded, we're going to loop through all of their pets, and then we're going to replicate that player equipping all of their already equipped pets, because all of the other clients except for the initial player does not have this information. So that's why we have to replicate this to them when the profile is loaded. And with that being said, we're pretty much finished the entire pet follow system. One thing you might want to do is uncomment this permission that we commented out in the commander folder, because if you don't have that set up, you might have some issues and people might be abusing your commands. So make sure you don't forget to do that. And with everything else, we can go ahead, close those scripts, and we're all good to go. With that being said, that's going to be the end of this episode. If you guys did enjoy, as always, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified whenever I upload more Roblox development content. I also have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this episode. There's a link down below in the description, and you guys go and check that out. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.